Y'all need to listen to this.
A good attitude, exceptional skill or talent, and a top-notch education used to be enough to establish yourself as a success in nearly any field. Well, not any longer. The times have changed. In today's competitive global marketplace, where a good attitude is assumed, where top talent is in abundant supply, and education is just your ticket of entry, there is a missing fourth factor that is absolutely essential to your success: being perceived as a class act. Now, the Dale Carnegie Organization, which established itself with the classic bestseller, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and continued that success with the recent Nightingale Conant audio bestsellers, the Dale Carnegie Leadership Mastery Course, and the 5 Essential People Skills, brings you the definitive guide for personal success in the 21st century. In this dynamic and innovative program, the Dale Carnegie team covers that missing fourth factor in depth, something few, if any, other success and achievement programs even address. Class acts are people who so effectively differentiate themselves from other people in the marketplace that they make themselves unforgettable. They are originals, not copies. They provide inspiration, not imitation. Class acts dress in professional yet unique ways. They communicate persuasively and passionately, but with unmistakable sincerity and diplomacy. Their approach to getting things done is more than just to accomplish a task or complete a project as expected. They go beyond expectations and deliver a result that not only astonishes, but often surprises those they serve. Every action they take screams of originality: how fast they respond to an email, how they handle and resolve challenges both personally and professionally, to how they choose to leave a legacy, and ultimately leaving you with an unforgettable first impression. You'll learn how to develop all of these skills and more in this all-new program from the recognized leader in personal development training, the Dale Carnegie Organization. Like the unforgettable taste that lingers in your mouth after sipping a fine wine, once you develop the skills of a class act, your contributions in the marketplace will never be forgotten. And now, the Nightingale Conant Corporation is very pleased to bring you Make Yourself Unforgettable, the Dale Carnegie Class Act System.
Welcome to Make Yourself Unforgettable, the Dale Carnegie Class Act System. In Dale Carnegie's program, this is one of the most important attributes of success, and also one of the most challenging to define. But definitions aside, one thing is certain: class is easy to recognize. You know it when you see it. But there's a flip side. It's also easy to see the absence of class, which is not something you want seen in you. We'll have much more to say about these ideas in the sessions that follow. You'll have a chance to evolve your own definition of what class really means. And more importantly, you'll gain practical, powerful tools for literally making yourself unforgettable to everyone you meet. Whether it's in business or in any other area of life, nothing is more valuable than that. So let's get started. Here in Session 1, we'll look at the often ambiguous meaning of class and the far from ambiguous effect it can have in both business and personal interactions. We'll see how class was really the deciding factor at a critical moment in American history, and we'll explore how you can make the lessons of that moment work for you. In subsequent sessions, we'll explore 10 essential elements that comprise class in the truest sense of the word. Then in the final session of the program, we'll look at how class expresses itself through achievement in the material world, for you certainly, but also for those around you. This ability to create success for others is one of the most admirable qualities of class. Like a great athlete, a class person always plays the game at a high level and makes better players of his or her teammates as well. To begin our exploration of class and what it can do, let's look at a case in point. There has never been a clearer example of class in action than history's first presidential debate. The debate took place on September 13th, 1960. The participants, of course, were John F. Kennedy, then a senator from Massachusetts, and Vice President Richard M. Nixon. Over the years, whole books have been written about this event, but it's rarely been discussed from the perspective of class in the way that we'll be using the word. Yet class was really a huge factor in the debate. It really made the difference in who won and who lost, and in that sense, it changed the course of history. It's often been pointed out that people who heard the debate on radio thought that Richard Nixon had won, while the millions who watched on TV considered John Kennedy the clear winner. There's a simple reason for this. Nixon had an excellent presentation, but Kennedy had an overwhelming class advantage. What do we mean by class advantage? Well, it doesn't mean that Kennedy was wealthier than Nixon, although that may have been the case. What it does mean is the first very important point to understand about class. John Kennedy's class advantage came from the fact that he seemed cool, calm, and in control. Once again, Nixon had the content, but Kennedy had the class. In fact, nothing that was said that night was particularly significant. There were no zingers or sound bites, and the issues that were discussed seemed totally irrelevant in today's world. But what has endured are images of a relaxed and confident-looking John F. Kennedy. Clearly, the class act, despite the fact that Richard Nixon was more experienced and much better known. How did this happen? Well, amid all that has been written about the first presidential debate, 3 points stand out. We'll be returning to these points in various forms throughout the program, so as you listen to them now, give some thought to how they may also be present in your life and your career. You may never run for president, but you will surely be facing some of the same decisions Kennedy and Nixon made almost 50 years ago. On the surface, those decisions may have seemed to be about technicalities or procedures, but they were really about something else. They were about class, or the perception of class, and about how to most effectively communicate that perception. First, the participants in the debate were there for very different reasons. For Kennedy, the debate was a positive choice. As a relative unknown, he had everything to gain and little to lose. For Nixon, however, it was a constraint. And worst of all, it was a constraint he imposed upon himself against the counsel of those around him. Nixon's advisors urged him not to debate Kennedy, but Nixon felt compelled to do so. He felt he had something to prove, perhaps to himself more than to anyone else. So his actions were based on insecurity rather than strength. This is an extremely interesting dynamic, one that can affect any decision maker, regardless of the external circumstances. In fact, the more powerful people become, the more constrained they may feel to prove that they actually deserve their power. They need constant reassurance and support, which often manifests as a crew of yes men to head off any self-doubt. Class never expresses itself unwillingly. Class always is a positive or even a joyful choice. Even if your actions are objectively class, the positive effect is canceled if the motivation is negative. And make no mistake, negative motivation always reveals itself, sometimes in unexpected and embarrassing ways. For example, just before his presidential debate, Richard Nixon had spent several weeks in the hospital. He had undergone an operation on his knee, which he had injured during a strenuous campaign tour. Nixon looked pale and uncomfortable, which was one reason his advisors were against the debate. Nixon overruled them, however, and insisted on going ahead. Of course, he bumped his sore knee on the car door as he arrived at the television studio. This didn't exactly get him off on the right foot, so to speak. That wasn't the end of it either. He bumped his head on a microphone when he stood up to say hello to Senator Kennedy. Coincidence? Maybe. But bad luck is more likely to happen when bad choices have been made. Richard Nixon was in the debate for the wrong reason. He had not made the decision from a place of control. On the contrary, he felt that he himself was being controlled by outside constraints. The irony was, these constraints were virtually all of his own making. A second telling moment had to do with the importance of making a positive first impression. If Richard Nixon made a mistake in accepting the debate in the first place, he made another mistake in how he presented himself. He didn't think clearly about optimizing his manner and his appearance, which, after all, is what people rely on for positive or negative reactions. Specifically, Nixon didn't dress appropriately. That's not to say that he showed up in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, but the effect was almost as bad. Since the vast majority of television screens in 1960 were still black and white, wearing a gray suit, as Nixon did, was a very poor idea. It caused the vice president to fade into the background, while Kennedy's dark suit made him seem vivid and commanding. Nixon looked like a tired businessman. Kennedy looked like he was already the president. There's a clear lesson here. Sometimes there's nothing subtle about class. Sometimes being a class act is simply a matter of making appropriate choices at the most basic levels. Along similar lines, it often has been noted that Nixon refused to have makeup applied before the debate. When he began to perspire under the hot studio lights, he looked like he was being interrogated about a crime rather than running for the highest office in the land. Actually, what happened is slightly more complicated. The truth is, Kennedy also refused to wear makeup, and when Nixon saw that, he also refused. Why? Not because he thought he didn't need it, but because he didn't want to seem more insecure than Kennedy to the people in the studio. Once again, he was letting someone else influence his decisions instead of taking responsibility himself. Since Kennedy had just spent the previous week in Florida, he looked suntanned and rested. Not wearing makeup was a good tactical decision. But Nixon, as we've mentioned, had been in the hospital, and he looked it. In the end, he allowed his first impression to be dictated by an ego-based anxiety, instead of simply looking at the facts of the situation and taking reasonable action. Class, after all, isn't rocket science, so don't try to make it more complicated than it has to be. Beyond the strategic mistake of agreeing to take part in the debate, and the tactical mistake of not presenting himself effectively, there was a third, more basic error that essentially gave away the class contest to John Kennedy. Vice President Nixon did not have a clear understanding of what he could control and what he couldn't. He couldn't control the fact that he was the type of person who was inclined to perspire under hot lights, but he was in control of the decision to wear makeup. However, he allowed his opponent to make that decision for him. He lost control, and the reason he did so was because he failed to take responsibility. In a moment, we'll have more to say about responsibility and why it's nothing less than the absolute foundation of class.
All right, so that's very important to listen about history. History has a way of repeating itself. This was 50 years ago. Richard Nixon and John Kennedy debate. Tomorrow is the debate between President Trump and President Biden. So keep these points in mind as we watch the debate tomorrow. Stay tuned.